The ocean has always held power, and now so do cartels. What began as mere smuggling speedboats has evolved into stealth submarines slipping beneath the surface of international waters. And today, intelligence reports suggest something unprecedented. A Mexican cartel has finished constructing a $4 billion, fully submersible vessel capable of crossing oceans, avoiding radar, and delivering millions in narcotics undetected. If a cartel can build a submarine rivaling military technology, then what comes next? And who exactly is in control of the seas? Join us as we reveal the $4 billion Mexican cartel submarine that has thrown the U.S. into panic. It would appear that the principle of who owns the sea owns the world is still quite relevant to this day. The ocean is now the medium through which it is most convenient to move strategic military forces and from which to launch strategic strikes. The simple proof of this is 10 U.S. airstrike groups roaming the world's oceans and dozens of nuclear submarines ready to deliver a lethal thermonuclear strike from the water column. It all began in the 1970s when a new drug hit the market called cocaine. It was at this time that the world finally got familiar with the white powder. From the very beginning, the biggest producer of cocaine was the South American country of Colombia. And it was also at this time they started creating different types of groups, which were basically the early forms of modern cartels, to get this substance everywhere in the world, especially the United States, because why not? It's the wealthiest nation that's close to them. Their strategy was quite simple. They'd take cheap cocaine from the source all the way to the US and sell it for ridiculously massive profits. The long and short of it is that they did this and became extremely wealthy. Very soon, tiny criminal groups turned into massive cartels. To be honest, these cartels were no joke at all. In fact, they stood even more powerful than the government itself. Some cartels even had their own military personnel to protect their goods and operations. So even if the government had policemen, SWAT teams, and military units, they were not going to be able to compete with these cartels. They were free to do whatever they wanted. About a decade later, the previously small cartels had become billion-dollar organizations, and their operations became more seamless. They could now easily transport drugs using airplanes, ships, helicopters, and even by driving cars through Mexico to get them into the US. And since they had billions of dollars at their disposal, they had little to no trouble finding airplanes and transport systems to deliver their goods. But this didn't last long because, as time passed, they started having trouble with different branches of the military and police, especially the Coast Guard, which began intercepting their shipments. For this reason, the cartels were forced to figure out another way to smuggle drugs into the US, other than by air and road. Since the sea surface had become much of a problem, the only route left for them to fully exploit was underwater. And so they began to look into submarines. At this time, the most powerful and richest cartel boss was naturally Pablo Escobar. He and other cartel bosses were multi-billionaires, so money was not an issue. His cartel, the Medellin cartel, along with the Cali cartel, began researching the idea of building submarines. Of course, they couldn't buy real military submarines, so they had to get creative and build their own. The novel idea of submarines was an eye-opener. It paved the way for a new possibility: transporting drugs to Europe. Before this, it was actually really hard to move drugs across the Atlantic because airplanes could only carry small loads. But the truth is, building a submarine is not easy at all. It is one of the most challenging engineering tasks. Yet would the cartels give up? Absolutely not. They immediately started investing millions into this idea. They hired engineers, designers, metalworkers, and bought specialized equipment. However, they couldn't just build submarines in a warehouse. They had to operate in secrecy. So they took all the engineers and tools deep into the jungle, far away from civilization, where no one could find them. Conveniently, cocaine production laboratories were already located in remote jungle areas. So it made sense to build the submarines right next to the cocaine production. They eventually succeeded in building functional submarines, although it's not clear exactly when they began using them. The first recorded capture of a cartel submarine happened in 1986 near Boca Raton, Florida. The U.S. Coast Guard discovered an unregistered submarine. When they arrested the men and inspected the vessel, they realized it was being used to smuggle cocaine. From this point forward, the US government understood that cartels were now trafficking drugs underwater. A few years later, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. When the USSR fell, many of its military assets, including weapons and vehicles, were left unattended in newly independent republics. This created opportunities for illegal deals. The cartels became interested in Soviet submarines, especially nuclear-powered submarines. One cartel connected with an Israeli-Ukrainian middleman named Leonid Feinberg, who claimed he could secure a submarine for $35 million. He traveled to Ukraine to arrange the deal. However, acquiring a nuclear submarine was nearly impossible. It wasn't only Russia that was concerned, NATO was extremely alert. Nuclear submarines are among the most powerful military platforms in the world. NATO wouldn't allow even an allied nation like Turkey to buy one, let alone a cartel. So the deal fell through. With that opportunity gone, the cartels returned to building their own submarines, and over the years they perfected the craft. By the 2010s, more than 200 cartel submarines had been captured by the US and Mexico. But if 200 have been caught, imagine how many have successfully completed their mission. Today, submarines are one of the main ways cartels smuggle cocaine into the United States. Instead of smuggling 10 kilograms at a time through airports or border crossings, they move tons at once underwater. This turns hundreds of thousands of dollars into hundreds of millions. For example, when 7 tons of cocaine reach Florida from Mexico, the value ranges between $200 to $300 million. Despite their relatively small size, some of these narco submarines carry 7.7 tons of cocaine inside them, valued at over $300 million, since a gram of cocaine has an average market price of $147. But what exactly is a narco submarine, and how dangerous is it? A narco submarine, also called a drug submarine or narco sub, is a type of vessel made especially for self-propelled ocean navigation. It can be semi-submersible, meaning part of it remains above the water, or fully submersible. It is a unit solely designed for drug trafficking. They are especially difficult to spot by maritime patrol vessels and hard to detect by radar because of their color, which blends in with the sea, the small portion of the vessel that remains above water, and the materials they are made of. To show just how dangerous these vessels are, by the end of 2024, in just 6 weeks, Operation Orion, conducted by 62 countries and led by authorities from Colombia, seized a total of 1,400 tons of drugs, of which 1,000 tons were marijuana, in 6 semi-submersible narco submarines, among other vessels. A man named Oscar Moreno Ricardo, and nicknamed the King of Semi-Submersibles by Colombian authorities, was arrested in January 2022. In the middle of the forest and near a river, Ricardo operated a clandestine shipyard for building semi-submersible narco submarines, with the help of a small but skilled group of people specially chosen by the cartels. The narco submarines they built were some of the most advanced in drug trafficking. They were mainly fiberglass, making them lightweight, corrosion-resistant, and hard to detect by radar. They had a low profile designed to travel with most of their structure submerged, leaving only part of the cabin and ventilation tube exposed above the water. They were painted blue or gray to improve sea camouflage and reduce aerial visibility. They were equipped with diesel or electric engines and had the range for long journeys, being able to travel more than 3,000 kilometers without refueling. Ricardo's narco submarines always stood out for their cargo capacity, with some being able to carry between 5 and 8 tons of cocaine at a time, a multi-million-dollar load that used to cross the Pacific without authorities noticing. There are thousands of ingenious ways used by major cartels to transport drugs from point A to point B, but none of these methods can transport larger quantities or maintain such a low detection rate as narco submarines, especially fully submersible ones, due to their stealth and theoretically unlimited size. And that's why the Sinaloa Cartel of Mexico has built a $4 billion narco sub to combat U.S. security. Let's take a look at the anatomy of the semi-submersible. In the center, there is the crew compartment, which can hold 2, 4, or more people. It is cramped, uncomfortable, and often has only a single seat for the pilot. The rest of the crew spends the trip lying down, standing, or crouching. Above this compartment are small windows for navigation and lookout for patrol boats, helicopters, and ships. At the back is the engine compartment, which usually runs on diesel, powering a single propeller that moves the vessel. Access to the engine compartment is available from the crew compartment for any necessary repairs. A snorkel extends so the engine can take in air to operate. At the front is the cargo compartment where the drugs are stored. It can range from 3 to 8 tons, but there are vessels with up to 12 tons of capacity. There are also ballast tanks for depth control and fuel tanks. Sometimes they evenly distribute the drug's weight in other compartments to keep the vessel stable. The speed varies from model to model, but on average they travel at more than 20 kilometers per hour. And it was at a similar speed that this narco submarine was traveling when it was spotted in international waters by a patrol plane, which immediately reported the vessel's position to the Coast Guard, which promptly intercepted it and put an end to the journey. There were 5 drug traffickers inside who ended up being arrested. Incredibly, most narco subs are used only once, and after completing their first and only mission, they are sunk in an attempt not to reveal the location where the drugs are loaded. And whenever a large amount of drugs is seized, this causes cartels to lose a lot of money, and it forces the builders to innovate. The Mexican Cartel transatlantic narco submarine is 22 meters long. It's similar to a military submarine with the difference that it's made of fiberglass. It has an oval hull, steering blades, and can fully submerge. That's because it has a snorkel, which is the only part that stays above the water, so that the air inside the cabin and the diesel engine can be regularly exchanged. It also has a generator and a camera on the snorkel, so that the crew always knows exactly what's happening outside the water. Ballast tanks allow it to increase its weight and dive deep into the sea if any danger is detected. When well utilized, it can carry an incredible 8 tons of cocaine from Mexico to various destinations, such as Brazil or Europe, and most especially US. But here's the shocking fact. The Sunlone cartel built more than one expensive submarine. But how's that possible? Well, the answer to that question was partially found at the end of 2020, when the Mexican Navy, with support from the United States Drug Enforcement Agency and local agencies, carried out an operation at an artisanal shipyard near the region of Mexico. Under an improvised roof, they found a narco submarine still being built, unlike anything previously discovered. The narco submarine measured 12 meters in length and had no fuel tanks or diesel engine. Instead, it carried an incredible 10 tons of batteries that powered 2 electric motors, which indicated that the narco submarine was electric. It is estimated that its range was about 12 hours. And besides being electric, it is fully submersible. In other words, it's very hard to detect. Authorities estimate that the construction cost was around $2.5 billion, and its cargo capacity was 6 tons of drugs. Although it carried 10 tons of batteries on board, its speed did not exceed 6 kilometers per hour, and therefore it would only cover at most a stretch of about 60-something kilometers, which is very little. But the people who built it were very smart and knew what they were doing. That's why the narco submarine had a towing winch right at the front. This means that the narco submarine was built in such a way that once loaded with drugs, it is submerged and towed by another vessel, which could be any ship that's part of the operation for whatever distance is needed until it's close to its destination. And once it's there, the narco submarine disconnects and continues its journey to the final extraction point, in this case powered by its batteries. All of this happens without raising suspicion or being detected. And this is so true and was so well done that to this day, no narco submarine of this type has ever been found in action, which reveals its supremacy. The United States has made it a point of duty to intercept and destroy cartel submarines, but it also reveals the truth. Cartels will not abandon submarines. They are too valuable, too effective, and too profitable. From their perspective, even if a vessel costing $2 million is lost, the next successful run, bringing in $200 million or more, pays for the risk many times over. Today, narco submarines represent one of the most advanced smuggling tools in the world. They are proof of how cartels evolve, always searching for the next advantage. And though many have been captured, dozens in a single year, the scale of the threat continues to grow. Each new model is quieter, harder to detect, and better disguised. Each new operation carries more drugs, more money, and more danger. And each one raises the stakes for the men and women hunting them across the seas. But as powerful as the subs may be, they are not invincible. Because while cartels innovate, the U.S. Navy, Coast Guard, and SEAL teams strike back with equal determination. The question now becomes, who are the warriors standing on the front lines of this fight? And how do they keep the hammer falling in a war that never ends? Most people imagine Navy destroyers or SEAL raids when they think of interdiction. But the real backbone of this war is the United States Coast Guard. Founded in 1790 as the Revenue Cutter Service, today the Coast Guard stands as one of America's smallest military branches, with 41,000 active duty members, 7 the rate 800 reservists, and more than 8,000 civilians. Despite its size, its reach spans both the Atlantic and Pacific, operating cutters, patrol boats, helicopters, and aircraft that crisscross the hemisphere. Their mission is simple in words but immense in scope: keep dangerous drugs from reaching U.S. shores. And their strategy is aggressive. Rather than waiting for narcotics to arrive, they intercept them as close to the source as possible, striking in the Pacific corridors off Mexico, Central America, and South America. The Coast Guard doesn't fight alone. Maritime counter-drug agreements link the United States with Caribbean and Latin American partners. Joint operations with U.S. Southern Command share intelligence across borders. Initiatives such as multilateral maritime counter-drug summits coordinate strategies among dozens of nations. In 2014 alone, the Coast Guard disrupted 164 smuggling attempts, seizing 93 vessels and confiscating hundreds of millions in narcotics. For the cartels, these partnerships are devastating. What once was a solitary fight against a single country has become a multinational net stretching across oceans. Cartel submarines evolve, but so too does the technology designed to find them. Towed sonar arrays trail behind cutters, listening for the hum of engines beneath the surface. These systems are highly effective, but only in deep water and only within a limited range. That's why additional tools are brought into the hunt. Advanced underwater robots, nicknamed bluefins, can maneuver where ships cannot. Equipped with sensors, they prowl the depths, listening for submarines. But even these have limits, detecting only within a few miles and struggling to relay signals while submerged. It is a constant race. Cartel innovation against American ingenuity. Behind every piece of hardware are sailors, aviators, and special operators. Boarding teams risk their lives leaping onto half-submerged vessels in pounding seas. Helicopter crews hover above, engines roaring, weapons ready, prepared to disable engines with precise shots. And in the most sensitive missions, Navy SEALs join the fight, raiding fortified cartel assets on land and striking with the precision of a scalpel. Every interdiction is dangerous. Every mission could end in chaos. But each successful strike denies cartels the lifeblood they crave: money. Captured submarines are examined, stripped for evidence, and sometimes destroyed. Fingerprints, DNA samples, hidden compartments, all are cataloged to build cases against traffickers. Some submarines are dismantled for training, others preserved as trophies of war. But the real victory is intelligence. Each vessel tells a story: routes, methods, names. Piece by piece, the cartel's network is mapped and dismantled. In the late 80s, Miami was the face of the cocaine epidemic, streets awash with cash, smugglers flaunting their power. Today, that chaos is gone, replaced by a quieter but far deadlier global trade. Cartels still adapt, they still innovate, but so do the forces standing against them. For the cartels, the sight of U.S. Navy SEALs or Coast Guard cutters on the horizon means one thing: the hammer is about to fall. And as another cartel submarine lies gutted in port, its cargo seized, its crew in custody, the message rings out across the oceans. No matter how deep the cartels hide, the hammer will find them. A narco submarine packed with cocaine drifted dangerously close to a United States Navy destroyer armed for war. What followed was the deadliest anti-drug operation ever recorded, shattering a billion-dollar empire in just 72 hours. But how could a crude jungle-built vessel even stand a chance against cutting-edge naval power? And what secret weapons did the Navy unleash to crush these ghost subs once and for all? Join us as we find out how much of a mistake it will be when a narco submarine gets too close to the United States Navy destroyer. 3 traffickers made the gravest mistake in narco submarine history when their handmade vessel drifted too close to the USS James, a 418-foot warship built for battle. not mercy. The James wasn't just another patrol ship. It carried state-of-the-art detection systems, 57mm deck guns, and helicopters armed for combat. The drug runners had wandered straight into a trap they could never escape. The submarine barely broke the Pacific surface, rising only 3 feet above the waves. A shipment of Colombian cocaine, weighing 5 tons and valued at approximately $500 million, was being transported towards the United States via a diesel-powered vessel emitting black smoke. The craft, built in a jungle hideout from fiberglass and timber, was designed to hide from patrols. Against small boats and aircraft, its low profile worked. Against a Navy destroyer, it was useless. On the James, Captain Thomas Rodzowicz studied the radar screen. The submarine's heat signature glowed clear as day. The Navy's thermal imaging systems were built to track warships across oceans. A homemade drug sub didn't stand a chance. Within minutes, his crew had the vessel's location, speed, and even its estimated cargo weight based on how deep it sat in the water. The traffickers realized too late what they had stumbled into. The thunder of helicopter rotors broke the silence. From the destroyer's flight deck, Navy helicopters armed with advanced targeting systems took to the sky. These weren't drug enforcement pilots. They were trained for war. Panic set in. The sub could barely make 12 knots at full throttle, while the destroyer could cut through the ocean at 30. With 40,000 horsepower driving its twin engines, the Navy ship turned what might have been a chase into a slaughter. The traffickers made their next mistake. They tried to dump the evidence. One after another, cocaine bales splashed into the Pacific, nearly 6,000 pounds of pure product worth $300 million. But the James documented everything, filming and marking GPS coordinates of every package. Instead of erasing evidence, the crew had just added more charges to their fate. In desperation, they reached for the scuttle plug, the last resort for crews like theirs. Flood the vessel, sink it fast, and take the drugs to the bottom with it. Better the ocean floor than a United States courtroom, but the Navy was faster. Rigid inflatable boats launched from the destroyer's stern, carrying boarding teams trained for hostile seizures. Within 15 minutes, the traffickers were dragged from their sinking sub, surrounded and subdued by armed sailors. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Federal prosecutors hit them with charges of international trafficking, conspiracy to distribute cocaine, and operating an unregistered vessel. Each carried decades of prison time. Their submarine was towed, studied, and then destroyed with controlled fire from the James itself. By the time the destroyer returned to port, the lesson was clear. No cartel craft, no matter how hidden or clever, can survive a direct encounter with United States naval power. The 3 men lost their freedom, their cargo, and any chance of return. They had challenged a war machine, and the war machine answered. That single encounter was only the spark. What followed became one of the most devastating anti-narcotics operations in modern naval history. In just 72 hours, a single United States destroyer dismantled a trafficking network worth more than $1 billion. The question remains, how does one warship take down an empire? Captain Thomas Rodzowicz commanded the USS James when intelligence officers gave the mission its unforgettable name, the Pacific Cocaine Massacre. His destroyer, armed with advanced surveillance and a specialized strike team, neutralized 6 high-speed smuggling boats and 1 narco submarine. Together, the vessels carried 24,000 pounds of cocaine, cargo valued at over $1 billion once it hit American streets. The operation unfolded with brutal efficiency off the coast of Ecuador. From the moment the destroyer's radar screens lit up, the scale of the traffickers' plan became clear. Across hundreds of square miles of ocean, the radar tracked multiple vessels, speedboats loaded with 2 to 3 tons of cocaine each, and a semi-submersible submarine carrying another 5 tons. The cartels had coordinated their fleet to overwhelm routine patrols, never expecting to encounter a full-scale naval destroyer. The first strikes came from above helicopters lifted off from the deck of the James, flown by pilots trained for battle rather than routine patrols. Their aircraft carried advanced targeting gear and mounted weapons built for hostile seas. Within minutes, the smugglers learned speed was no match for military precision. What started as a chase quickly turned into a demonstration of overwhelming power and control. The submarine, however, posed a tougher challenge. 300 miles off the Galapagos, the low-slung vessel tried to vanish beneath the waves as rotors thundered overhead. But it could only manage 12 knots at top speed, while the James pushed 30 without strain. Its twin diesel engines, producing 40,000 horsepower, made pursuit less of a chase and more of a hunt. The Navy wasn't working alone. Maritime patrol planes swept into the operation, casting a wide net of surveillance across the ocean. From the air, crews tracked several vessels at once, picking up the heat of their engines and even gauging how heavily they were loaded by how deeply they rode in the water. Each update was sent straight to the destroyer, allowing the Navy to close in with precision. The traffickers, realizing the trap was tightening, answered with desperation. One speedboat dumped bale after bale into the Pacific, 6,000 pounds of cocaine scattering across the waves nearly 200 miles offshore. The James stayed locked in pursuit for 60 miles, while other naval crews worked to recover the floating cargo with nets and cranes. Every package became another piece of evidence and another nail in the traffickers' case. Boarding operations followed. From the destroyer's stern, rigid inflatable boats launched with specialist boarding teams. These weren't Coast Guard inspectors. They were sailors trained for combat. They closed in, overwhelmed resistance, and subdued crews within minutes. Against that kind of force, there was no contest. When investigators pulled the threads together, the scale of the operation stunned even seasoned intelligence officers. The vessels were tied directly to the Sinaloa Cartel, Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, and Colombia's Clan del Golfo. These weren't small-time smugglers. This was a coordinated billion-dollar network stretching across countries, an empire on the water. Each stage of gathering evidence was handled with care and precision. Crews photographed vessels, cataloged cocaine bales, logged GPS points, and transmitted intelligence back to Washington and international law enforcement in real time. Nothing was left to chance. When the evidence was secured, destruction began. Naval gunners opened fire with 57mm deck guns, tearing through wooden speedboats until they were nothing but wreckage. The submarine's fiberglass hull was obliterated by controlled charges. One by one, the cartel's fleet was reduced to smoldering debris sinking into the Pacific. The 72-hour blitz sent shockwaves through the underworld. Cartel bosses who thought they had perfected stealth watched as a billion-dollar operation crumbled in less than 3 days. The message was clear. Against United States naval power, even the largest trafficking empire is nothing more than a target. The wrecked vessels are only a glimpse of something far more sinister beneath the surface. These crude submarines are so dangerous that their own crews call them by a chilling name: the coffins. The word isn't an exaggeration. Built mostly from wood and fiberglass, these boats kill almost as often as law enforcement does. At 50 feet long, they can carry up to 10 tons of cocaine, yet ride so low in the Pacific that waves are constantly breaking over the hull. Inside, the crew has less room than a bedroom closet. 3 or 4 men are packed in tight, forced to endure weeks at sea in conditions that push most people to the edge within days. From 2019 to 2023, Colombian forces discovered 39 of these homemade submarines tucked away in secret jungle shipyards. Each one is designed with a fatal feature: a scuttle plug. Crews can pull it to flood the vessel and sink everything: cargo, evidence, and sometimes themselves. It's meant as an escape from capture, but in practice it doubles as a death sentence. Every part of the engineering puts cocaine ahead of human life. Diesel engines pump exhaust straight into the cramped compartments, poisoning the air the men breathe. In 2023, Colombian naval forces boarded a drifting submarine and found 2 crewmen slumped dead at the controls, killed by fumes, while the autopilot kept steering 5 tons of cocaine toward the United States coast. The materials tell the same story of compromise. The thin fiberglass and wood hull, often no more than 2 inches thick, is designed to slip under radar, not to withstand the ocean. Rough seas batter the low decks, sending waves into the living quarters where salt water mixes with diesel fumes to create a toxic haze. Navigation is equally primitive. Crews steer with basic GPS units and manual controls that demand constant attention. There is no chance to rotate shifts for sleep. Men stay awake for days on end, combining exhaustion with chemical poisoning until breakdowns and hallucinations become inevitable. At the high end, some cartels spend up to $4 million on submarines that can dive 30 feet below the surface. These advanced models carry ballast tanks, hydroplanes, and lead shielding to hide from thermal sensors. No one has ever caught one of these fully submersible versions in open waters. They remain the most elusive and dangerous tools in the smuggler's arsenal. But across all models, the death toll rivals that of battlefields. In February 2025, traffickers pulled the scuttle plug during a boarding attempt by the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard. The flooding mechanism killed not only the suspect's evidence, but also a law enforcement officer who was still inside the boat. Even the weaknesses that help navies track these vessels turn against the men inside. The same heat signatures that expose them to thermal detection also burn beneath the crew compartments, pumping deadly fumes directly into their lungs. Survival gear is almost non-existent. The men bring only the bare minimum of food and water, enough for the trip if everything goes as planned. There are no reserves for breakdowns or delays. Radios and emergency beacons are usually left behind, since a single signal could expose their location. That silence leaves the crews alone with the sea, trapped inside what is essentially a coffin drifting toward its destination. And still, the demand for cocaine keeps these vessels in production. Each successful run convinces more men to take the risk, climbing aboard submarines built not just to move drugs, but to claim lives. Regional submarine runs were dangerous enough, but everything changed once traffickers realized their so-called coffins could cross entire oceans. How did crude wooden boats, pieced together in jungle workshops, suddenly become a threat to ports on the other side of the world? The turning point came in 2019, when European authorities discovered a 72-foot narco submarine that had washed ashore in Galicia, Spain. Against every expectation, the vessel had crossed the Atlantic from South America, hauling tons of cocaine undetected through some of the most closely watched waters on Earth. The voyage spanned more than 4,000 miles and proved what intelligence agencies had long feared. These submarines could reach almost anywhere. That first crossing opened the floodgates. Since then, at least a dozen more subs have attempted intercontinental runs to supply European and Australian markets. 8 of those attempts happened in just the past 2 years, showing how quickly cartels have scaled up their global operations. One vessel's trip revealed just how far the traffickers had refined their methods. It moved more than 1,200 kilometers along the Amazon River before reaching the Atlantic, a journey that demanded skilled navigation and careful control of fuel supplies. Unlike the rough, improvised boats built in Colombia's coastal jungles, this sub had been constructed in a Brazilian yard near Manaus, with techniques better suited for long-distance voyages. Interceptions tell part of the story. Authorities have stopped subs carrying 6.5 tons of cocaine near the Azores, found abandoned hulls washed up in Sierra Leone, and even seized Pacific crossers aimed at Australia with 5-ton payloads. Yet every bust is also a reminder that countless other runs likely slipped through unseen. Shipyards are no longer limited to Colombia. Police and military units have found submarine workshops in Brazil, Venezuela, Guyana, and Suriname, proof that the trade has pushed well beyond its original stronghold. These newer facilities specialize in boats meant for open ocean crossings rather than short coastal runs. Camouflage has become an art form. Subs intended for the Pacific are painted in pale greens and teals to blend with tropical waters, while Atlantic boats are finished in storm gray or dark blue to disappear into rough northern seas. Such attention to detail underscores how professional these criminal operations have become. Support networks at sea keep the system running. Fishing boats posing as legitimate vessels act as mobile refueling stations, meeting submarines in international waters to top off their tanks. A standard sub carries about 1,350 gallons of fuel, enough for long legs of the trip, but not an entire ocean without resupply. These covert refueling rendezvous take place far from the eyes of maritime patrols. Technology has also advanced. Some modern designs include narco torpedo systems, steel containers packed with up to 5 tons of cocaine, dragged 200 meters behind a boat. If law enforcement closes in, the torpedo can be detached and sunk to 30 meters with a radio-controlled release, leaving the surface vessel looking clean. Later, the cargo can be retrieved by divers or GPS-guided recovery crews. Unexpected hotspots have emerged. Between 2017 and 2019, 5 subs beached themselves on Costa Rica's southern coast, turning stretches of tranquil shoreline into staging grounds for smuggling. For traffickers, the geography made it an ideal jumping-off point toward North America and Europe. The economics explain why the risks are worth it. A 5-ton load valued at $50 million in Colombia can fetch more than $200 million on European streets. Those margins justify multi-million-dollar builds, long ocean crossings, and the steady loss of crews who never make it back. Intelligence agencies track what they can with satellites and surveillance aircraft. But once a submarine vanishes into the open ocean, detection rates plummet. The sheer size of the sea offers natural cover, and the boats are designed to exploit exactly those gaps in patrol coverage. Today, the so-called cocaine navy is no longer a regional menace. With subs operating across the Atlantic and Pacific, these floating coffins now threaten maritime security in nearly every major shipping lane on Earth. The rise of transoceanic drug submarines has created a problem the world's navies were never built to handle, and it exposes a brutal truth about modern sea power. How can trillion-dollar militaries fail to stop wooden boats pieced together in jungle workshops? When General John Kelly, the former commander of United States Southern Command, testified before Congress, his words stunned lawmakers. When asked about America's ability to counter narco subs, he admitted he simply sat and watched it go by. Kelly's point was clear. Advanced warships, cutting-edge radar, and satellite surveillance mean little against the scale of the trade and the sheer size of the oceans. Internal assessments confirm the gap. United States forces are only able to pursue about a quarter of the drug subs they detect. That leaves nearly 3 out of 4 free to finish their voyages untouched. Once a vessel reaches the open sea, the odds are even worse. Interdiction drops to around 5%, meaning 95% of these runs succeed without anyone laying a hand on them. Colombia's Navy does better in rivers and estuaries, stopping some before they ever reach the ocean, but those account for only a fraction of the overall flow. The USS James illustrates both sides of this struggle. The destroyer spent 112 days scouring the eastern Pacific, armed with powerful deck guns, advanced radar, helicopters, and boarding teams. Over that deployment, the crew seized 48,000 pounds of cocaine and captured 34 traffickers across 11 separate busts. Yet analysts believe that haul represented less than 10% of what actually moved through the region in the same window. The United States Coast Guard faces the same reality. In January 2024 alone, its cutters pulled more than 24 tons of drugs from the Pacific. It was a victory worth noting, but intelligence officials estimate that dozens of similar runs went undetected at the same time, carrying billions of dollars in cocaine toward United States and European markets. Technology has not closed the gap. Surveillance planes can pick up engine heat signatures, measure displacement in the water, and pass targeting data to ships below. But those systems are designed for individual targets. When dozens of vessels scatter across thousands of square miles at once, even the best equipment becomes stretched thin. And while destroyers and cutters pack overwhelming firepower, guns that can turn a speedboat into splinters in seconds, explosives that can obliterate a submarine hull, their weapons only matter if the enemy can be found. Washington has tried to respond with tougher measures. Cartels have been branded as terrorist organizations, more military assets have been deployed to choke points, and new patrols have been ordered across key transit zones. But despite the extra muscle, the traffic hasn't slowed. If anything, it continues to grow. Every seized vessel follows a strict chain of evidence. Crews photograph everything, log GPS coordinates, and secure drug packages for prosecution before scuttling the craft with deck guns or demolition charges. The courts hand down long prison terms, decades in many cases. Still, the lure of cartel money keeps new crews coming, willing to trade their lives for a chance at fortune. This hidden war now stretches across every major ocean, a shadow fleet of homemade submarines slipping past some of the most sophisticated navies on Earth. The equation is simple but devastating. The oceans are too vast, the boats too many, and the profit too great. Along one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, a silent and dangerous threat is growing. Drug cartels are now using high-tech submarines to smuggle massive amounts of narcotics into the United States. These stealthy operations are becoming more frequent and daring, pushing frustration in Washington to new heights. How are these criminal groups able to pull off such secret missions beneath the waves? And more importantly, what message does it send when these subs can slip past defenses and deliver their deadly cargo without being stopped? Join us as we unveil how the United States Navy plans to unleash hell on cartel submarines. Back in the 1980s, drug smugglers were speeding across waves in go-fast boats and flying under the radar in small planes. These powerful boats had multiple engines and could zip past authorities with ease. But when radar technology caught up, those speedy getaways started failing. That's when smugglers looked for a new trick: semi-submarines built to quietly glide beneath the surface. The first big surprise came in 1988, when U.S. officials found a strange, unmanned submarine in Boca Raton, Florida. About 21 feet long and built for remote control, it was designed to be towed and had a hatch that only opened from the outside. Though it was empty when discovered, investigators quickly realized it wasn't just a one-off. It was likely used for sneaky drug deliveries. Fast forward to the early 1990s, and the powerful Medellin cartel saw massive potential. They knew that if they could move cocaine underwater, they'd dodge radar and avoid arrest. Already in control of coca growing, drug processing, and shipping, they saw narco submarines as the next smart step to tighten their grip on the entire operation. As go-fast boats became more of a liability, the cartels dreamed bigger. They wanted a vessel that could travel long distances, avoid detection, and power itself across oceans. To make it happen, they didn't just rely on local talent. They went international, hiring engineers from the Russian Navy to help design their secretive submarines. Even after the fall of the Medellin cartel and the arrests of the Cali cartel bosses, the dream didn't die. New criminal groups kept the idea alive, pushing more money and energy into submarine tech. They weren't just moving drugs, they were building silent, stealthy machines to carry their empire across the sea. Now they are no longer just chaotic gangs with basic weapons and fast boats. They had become smarter, more organized, and far more strategic. With time, they had gained access to enormous amounts of money, and instead of just spending it on lavish lifestyles, they began investing in something far more dangerous: technology. These cartels had learned to adapt quickly to changes in their environment. They knew that law enforcement officers and military forces were constantly looking for better ways to catch them and block the flow of illegal drugs. So instead of staying one step behind, the cartels pushed forward, using technology to gain the upper hand. This growing battle between both sides turned into a high-tech race. While the cartels worked on making their drug operations faster and more hidden, the police and the military were also busy improving their tools for tracking and surveillance. Both sides were trying to outsmart each other. Cartels didn't just rely on old methods anymore. They were thinking like engineers and tech experts, looking for clever ways to escape detection and stay in control. One of the most surprising results of this ongoing battle was the creation of narco submarines. These are real, homemade submarines, built for one main purpose: smuggling drugs underwater without being seen. Over the past 20 years, Colombian drug cartels had quietly shifted from using fast boats and small aircraft to building their own submersibles. They were built in hidden workshops deep in the jungle or tucked away in remote areas. Some of these subs could travel for hundreds of miles, staying low and quiet under the surface of the water. Some were fully submersible, while others floated just below the waves, making them hard to spot by radar or patrol planes. This change was driven by the increasing danger of losing entire drug shipments to authorities. Planes were being tracked, boats were being stopped, and cartels were losing millions. So they responded by building something the authorities weren't prepared for, but submarines. Since 2013, this type of transport has helped increase drug trafficking by 10%. It is mostly used to move cocaine from Colombia, where 93% of the cocaine consumed in the U.S. is made, to Central America and Mexico. From there, the drugs are sent into the United States. The DEA says this route now handles about 93% of the cocaine smuggled from South America to North America. In comparison, only 7% moves through the Caribbean islands, mainly the Dominican Republic, before reaching Florida or other areas along the eastern coast of the U.S. A narco submarine, often called a narco sub, is a special type of homemade boat that drug traffickers build to secretly move illegal drugs, especially cocaine. These submarines are self-powered and can travel long distances underwater or just below the surface, which makes them very hard to spot. Over time, the design and technology behind these vessels have become more advanced. Builders have improved the shape, speed, and quietness of the subs, making it even harder for law enforcement to find and stop them. Even though these submarines are expensive to build, drug traffickers still think they're worth the money. The reason is simple. What they gain in return is far greater than what they spend. A single narco sub can carry tons of drugs worth millions, and if just one trip succeeds, it pays for the cost of building the submarine many times over. From a business point of view, it's a smart investment for the cartels. On the other side, military forces and police in different countries have been working more closely together to stop the drug trade. They've shared information, upgraded their equipment, and teamed up for missions. Still, narco subs continue to be a big problem. Their secretive design helps the drugs reach their destinations while avoiding radar and patrol boats. Although some of these subs have been caught over the years, many more likely make it through undetected. When the authorities do manage to seize one of these submarines, it gives them a rare chance to learn how they work. By studying the parts, engines, and materials used, experts can figure out how the subs are built and what routes they might be taking. This helps improve future tracking and interception efforts. Much of this activity is linked to the cocaine trade that started in the Andean region of South America, countries like Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. From there, huge amounts of cocaine are smuggled into the United States every year. According to a United Nations estimate from 2008, the U.S. retail market for cocaine was worth around $88 billion a year. That's an enormous amount of money, and over the last 35 years, it has added up to trillions of dollars in sales. Drug cartels are willing to take big risks and spend a lot on technology because the rewards are so high. Narco submarines are just one part of a larger network of drug smuggling methods. Traffickers also use high-speed boats, known as go-fast boats, small airplanes, and creative hiding places, like stuffing drugs inside shipping containers, food products, or even small items like toys. Sometimes they pay people, called drug mules, to carry small amounts of drugs hidden on or inside their bodies. As of June 2012, experts reported that around 80% of the illegal drug flow from the Andean region, mainly Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia, into countries like Honduras, Mexico, and other halfway points before entering the United States happens through the sea. Out of that maritime traffic, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration believed that nearly 30% involved the use of narco submarines. These special smuggling boats have become an important tool for drug traffickers, helping them sneak drugs past patrols and coast guards. Even though the U.S. and its allies try to stop these drug shipments, the success rate is still low. In March 2014, General John F. Kelly, the head of the U.S. Southern Command at the time, spoke to the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee. He explained that due to limited funding and equipment shortages, they had to cancel more than 200 key missions and joint training exercises with other countries. These cancellations left huge gaps in their ability to fight drug trafficking at sea. He admitted that they simply didn't have enough ships, aircraft, or resources to go after all the drug boats they knew were out there. In fact, they could only act on about 26% of the suspected maritime smuggling cases, meaning nearly 3 out of every 4 drug boats went untouched. Because of these shortages, drug smugglers often operate with little fear of being caught. Narco submarines and other smuggling boats continue to move large loads of drugs across the ocean without much interference. Only a small number of them are actually intercepted. Rear Admiral Charles Michel, who served as the director of the Joint Interagency Task Force South, gave more details in June 2012. He said that the U.S. first spotted a self-propelled semi-submersible in the ocean back in 2006. These types of submarines, which move just below the water's surface and are very hard to see, became more common over the next few years. By as many as 60 of these vessels were being used each year, carrying about 330 metric tons of cocaine annually. Originally, these narco subs were used only in the Eastern Pacific, but starting in July 2011, drug cartels began sending them through the Western Caribbean too. JIATF South helped to stop 5 of these submarines in that region, and each one was found carrying over 6.5 metric tons of cocaine. Altogether, 214 narco-submarine events have been documented, but only 45 were successfully stopped. That's because these subs are built to be low and quiet, making them extremely difficult to detect. No one is exactly sure how many of these submarines exist, but it's likely that dozens are built every year. Powerful criminal groups in Colombia, such as the FARC, the Rastreros, and the Urabeños, are known to be behind most of their production. Whether more or fewer are made depends on how the subs are used. U.S. officials believe that most are used once and then sunk to hide the evidence. However, Colombian officials think many are reused. This disagreement affects how many new submarines drug cartels need to build every year to replace the ones lost through capture, sinking, or scuttling after delivery. Over the last 20 years, narco submarines have become much more advanced. They have improved in both design and capability. At first, many were only semi-submersible, meaning they traveled just below the surface. But now some are fully submersible and can dive deeper, making them harder to detect. If Colombian drug cartels succeed in their plans to send these fully submersible narco subs all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to West Africa and Europe, it would mark a major shift in smuggling. These long journeys would make each trip so valuable that traffickers likely wouldn't sink the vessels afterward, as they sometimes do with shorter trips. This shift in the drug trade shows how important and profitable the cocaine market is, especially in the United States. Every year, tons of cocaine are smuggled from South America into the U.S., and much of it goes undetected during the early parts of the journey. With so many of these submarines slipping past patrols, it's clear that authorities are struggling to keep up with the traffickers' clever methods and advanced tools. This growing challenge has pushed law enforcement to adapt quickly, but the numbers suggest that traffickers are staying one step ahead, expanding their reach and refining their tactics. In 2024, authorities intercepted a near-record number of narco submarines trying to cross both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. These drug-filled vessels were not just spotted in the usual routes, they started showing up in new areas too. This shows that drug traffickers are relying more and more on these quiet, hard-to-detect submarines to move cocaine to global markets. For many years, narco subs were mainly used to carry cocaine from Colombia's Pacific coast to countries like Mexico or those in Central America. But the latest seizure reports reveal something more troubling. These submarines are not only increasing in number, but also becoming more advanced. They're now built to travel longer distances, avoid detection with better stealth designs, and even reach parts of the world that were not previously targeted by drug cartels. These recent developments show just how serious the situation has become. Cartels are no longer using narco subs just for short coastal trips. Some are now attempting long ocean crossings, such as to Europe or West Africa, which could open up even more dangerous trafficking networks. This shift signals a bold and aggressive strategy by criminal groups who are constantly looking for ways to stay ahead of law enforcement. Of the 240 narco submarines analyzed by Insight Crime, more than half were built in hidden, handmade shipyards along Colombia's Pacific coast. These areas, especially the country's western departments, are covered in thick jungle and crisscrossed by rivers that lead to the ocean. Deep inside narrow estuaries, shielded by tall trees and dense plants, many secret boat-building sites are tucked away. These locations are not only hard to find, but are also close to key waterways, making them perfect for launching drug submarines into the sea. Each hidden shipyard acts like a mini criminal workshop. These sites pull together a wide range of people with different skills and roles. There are drug producers, boat builders, mechanical experts, experienced sailors, armed guards, and even engineers. All of them work under the leadership of major criminal groups that have the money and patience to support such complex operations. These groups are willing to wait several months for a profit once the drugs hidden inside the narcosubs arrive at their destinations overseas. Between 2019 and 2023, authorities discovered many of these secret yards. Data from SimCon shows that 26 were found in Nariño, 10 in Cauca, and 3 each in Valle del Cauca and Choco. It's no surprise that these places are also major centers for growing coca, the plant used to make cocaine. Having shipyards close to coca fields means the drugs don't have to travel far by land, reducing the risk of being caught before they reach the water. While most narco-sub shipyards are based along Colombia's Pacific coast, law enforcement has found similar sites in Brazil, Venezuela, Guyana, and Suriname. This shows that traffickers are expanding their operations and using these boats to reach Europe more directly, where cocaine sells for even higher prices. Some of the most advanced narco-subs have been built in surprising places, far from the coast. These inland locations have better access to materials, tools, and skilled workers. A striking example occurred in 2000 when Colombian police discovered a huge, partially completed submarine in a warehouse in a suburb of Bogotá. It was 100 feet long and, according to estimates at the time, could carry up to 15 tons of cocaine. This inland construction proved that cartels weren't limited by location. They were willing to adapt, build smarter, and find ways to hide their work wherever it was safest. In a striking case from 2000, Colombian police uncovered a massive half-built narco-submarine in a warehouse in Bogotá. Authorities believed the plan was to finish constructing the sub in Bogotá, then disassemble it, transport it piece by piece to the Pacific coast, and reassemble it for its journey at sea. What raised further concern was the discovery of Russian-language documents at the scene. This led investigators to suspect possible involvement by Russian criminal organizations in the submarine's design or construction, suggesting a deeper and more international web of cooperation in drug trafficking operations. Almost 2 decades later, the sophistication and reach of narco-submarine trafficking took another leap. In 2019, European authorities intercepted a 22-meter, low-profile vessel believed to have been built near Manaus, Brazil. From there, the vessel traveled more than 1,200 kilometers down the Amazon River before crossing the Atlantic Ocean to reach Galicia on Spain's northern coast. This marked the first known case of a narco-sub successfully crossing the Atlantic, a significant development in the growing use of submersibles in transoceanic drug trafficking. By 2024, interceptions of these stealth vessels surged to near-record levels. Authorities captured 30 narco-subs that year, according to data reviewed by Insight Crime. Most of these vessels were caught along established Pacific drug routes between South America and Central America. A staggering 81% of the narco-subs in the Insight Crime database were seized in Pacific waters or just off the coast, confirming the region as a major trafficking corridor. Colombian law enforcement continues to focus on stopping these vessels while they are still in rivers or estuaries, where they are easier to locate. However, their success is limited. Only about 1 in 4 seizures happens in these inland waters. Once the subs reach the open ocean, they become incredibly difficult to track, and U.S. security officials estimate that interdiction rates can drop as low as 5%, depending on weather, surveillance coverage, and sea conditions. LPVs, due to their design and intent to evade detection, generally follow routes that exploit gaps in traditional surveillance coverage. A spokesperson from the Joint Interagency Task Force South explained to Insight Crime, "These routes are carefully planned, often taking advantage of unmonitored stretches of ocean where detection is unlikely." Narco-subs are often supported by a fleet of smaller boats and fishing vessels that serve as mobile refueling stations along the way. These support boats are positioned at key points along the route. Even though some LPVs can carry up to 1,350 gallons of fuel, rough seas, unexpected detours, or extended evasion from patrols may require earlier refueling stops to complete the journey. Back in 2014, U.S. Southern Command General John Kelly gave grim testimony before Congress. He explained that due to limited resources and the overwhelming number of trafficking attempts, the United States was only able to pursue 26% of all suspected maritime drug trafficking vessels. This shows just how hard it is to stop drug trafficking by sea, especially with the rise of narco-submarines. These stealthy subs are hard to find and carry large amounts of drugs. If the U.S. wants to stay ahead in the fight against drug cartels, it must improve its efforts to detect and stop these underwater threats. No criminal empire in recent history has loomed as large as the Sinaloa cartel. Yet America's forces face it without hesitation. Guns flash behind shipping containers, speedboats slice through moonlit waters, and secret airstrips pulse with illicit activity, but the U.S. watches calculating every move. The cartel may control streets and skies, but its power meets a force far greater. How can an organization this massive be contained? And why, despite its size, does it fail to intimidate the world's most formidable military? Join us as we uncover why the U.S. is not afraid to go after the largest cartel in history. For nearly 2 decades, Mexico has waged a relentless and bloody struggle against the cartels, deploying police, federal agents, and military personnel to a war that remains far from won. Since 2006, when the Mexican government officially declared war on organized crime, more than 460,000 people have lost their lives, a staggering toll that underscores the scale and persistence of the violence. Billions of dollars in aid from the United States have supported Mexico's fight, yet the death toll continues to climb, a stark testament to the cartel's resilience and adaptability. Even amidst these challenges, Mexico has achieved moments of success. When President Felipe Calderón launched the military offensive, he mobilized tens of thousands of Mexico's 412,000 active duty soldiers, often replacing or reinforcing local police. The crackdown yielded immediate results. 25 of the nation's 37 most notorious drug lords were captured, striking at the leadership of the major cartels. Yet this strategy revealed a critical flaw. Removing high-profile kingpins created power vacuums that fractured the underworld, splintering it into smaller, more violent factions. These emerging gangs were lean, unpredictable, and highly adaptable. Their decentralized operations and brutal tactics allowed them to operate under the radar and challenge state authority with increasing frequency. Compounding the problem, Calderón's successors shifted priorities, focusing on reducing homicide rates rather than aggressively pursuing the fragmented cartels, leaving these offshoots free to consolidate power. Today, the cartels are no longer merely criminal organizations. They have grown into paramilitary powers, capable of confronting the state on its own soil. Recognizing its limitations, Mexico has sought full U.S. involvement, and Washington has responded. The United States now brings its full technological and military might to the fight, deploying elite forces, advanced surveillance systems, and cutting-edge weaponry to a battle as complex as it is dangerous. The U.S. has urgent reasons to enter this fight. Between 90 and 94% of the heroin consumed in America originates in Mexico. At the same time, fentanyl, a far deadlier synthetic opioid, claims roughly 55,000 American lives each year. Cocaine adds yet another dimension, with thousands of tons crossing the southern border annually. For the United States, targeting the cartels is not just a matter of policy, it is a matter of survival. For Mexico, dismantling these criminal networks has been a decades-long struggle. Together, the alignment of these objectives creates a near-perfect partnership, where each country's interests reinforce the others, raising the stakes and amplifying the potential impact of success. On the surface, America holds an overwhelming advantage. The United States military, with its vast resources and global reach, enters a battlefield where sheer workforce seems to guarantee success. According to Global Firepower, the U.S. maintains roughly 1.3 million active duty personnel, supplemented by nearly 800,000 reservists ready to respond if needed. Additionally, the country could rapidly expand its forces through its draft, with an average of 4.3 million eligible individuals annually. While such measures may never be necessary, the scale of America's military dwarfs any criminal organization. Yet the cartels are far from insignificant. Estimates suggest that Mexico's criminal networks employ around 175,000 individuals across dozens of gangs, effectively making them the country's 5th largest employer. The prison system also feeds their ranks, effectively making them 1.7 million people incarcerated across Latin America. The cartels can recruit opportunistically, steadily replenishing and expanding their workforce. While this process is gradual, it ensures resilience under sustained pressure. Despite the U.S. military's overwhelming size, victory cannot be taken for granted. Success requires careful strategy because the cartels wield advantages beyond workforce, chief among them, fear. Mexican public opinion highlights the challenge. In 2012, 80% of Mexicans expressed support for military action against the cartels, indicating a desire to see drug kingpins removed from power. Yet fear complicates the picture. By 2023, surveys conducted by the Border Report revealed that residents in cartel-dominated cities frequently felt unsafe in their own homes. In Juarez and Mexicali, roughly 70% of adults reported living in fear. In Reynosa, the figure climbed to 83%. In Zacatecas, a city where corpses have been left hanging from bridges and stacked in vehicles, an alarming 92% of residents felt unsafe. This fear is precisely what the cartels exploit. It allows them to control communities without directly confronting the government. While some citizens may know where cartel members operate, few are willing to share intelligence, aware of the consequences. The threat of extreme violence, from abduction to execution, casts a shadow over any would-be informant, complicating operations far beyond what the workforce alone could resolve. The United States cannot simply surge into Mexican cities without caution. Cartel operatives blend seamlessly into urban environments, hiding among ordinary residents. Any aggressive assault risks massive civilian casualties, undermining the mission to weaken these criminal networks. Operations must therefore be precise, deliberate, and surgical, combining strategy with intelligence to navigate both the human and operational complexities of the battlefield. The weapons available to the cartels also pose a formidable challenge. Though Mexico allows citizens to own firearms, all legal sales occur through a single gun shop in Mexico City, controlled entirely by the Mexican military. This centralized system makes it virtually impossible for cartel members to acquire firearms legally, and the risks of attempting to circumvent the system are too significant. Arrests could compromise entire networks, so cartels overwhelmingly rely on smuggling weapons into the country. That smuggling has produced a heavily equipped criminal force whose arsenals are dominated by AR-15 and AK-47 style rifles, many traced to the United States and frequently modified to increase the rate of fire and lethality. In 2009 alone, authorities seized more than 4,400 modified rifles, many converted to select fire, while tens of thousands more remain in circulation. Even more alarming are the heavier systems that have surfaced. Insiders and seizures point to access to guided anti-armor weapons, with a Sinaloa operative known as El Flaco claiming javelin launchers and Mexican authorities having intercepted Stingers and AT-4 type launchers. Evidence that cartels possess stockpiles of battlefield-grade firepower. How every piece arrived remains unclear, though reported losses of military systems during past conflicts and persistent smuggling routes make diversion and illicit transfer plausible. And the presence of such weapons darkly raises the stakes of any conventional assault. The United States, however, fields overwhelming conventional strength. Thousands of tanks, hundreds of thousands of vehicles, hundreds of multiple launch rocket systems and artillery units, and widespread small arms and anti-armor inventories including javelins and standard M4 carbine issue, all backed by trained tactical units capable of large-scale operations. Still, raw firepower is only one part of the problem, because cartel strongholds are not isolated compounds but fortified positions embedded within towns and cities where civilians live and work, requiring restraint and surgical planning to avoid catastrophic collateral damage. A typical operation would therefore begin not with a frontal assault, but with containment. Forces would encircle the target, establish checkpoints on every access route, and issue public warnings through media and communications channels, instructing residents to shelter in place while schools and businesses close. Only after those measures and additional intelligence-driven preparations would armored convoys and infantry advance into the lockdown area, moving deliberately to isolate and dismantle the cartel presence while minimizing civilian harm. Intelligence is the backbone of these operations. Data gathered from surveillance and ground sources pinpoints the most critical cartel facilities, guiding American troops as they advance through urban streets. These movements resemble a heavily armed law enforcement sweep rather than a conventional military assault, emphasizing precision, minimizing civilian casualties, and targeting key cartel assets. When engaged, cartel members resist, transforming city streets into chaotic battlefields. AR-15 and AK-47s fire from rooftops, alleyways, and fortified positions, while U.S. forces respond with M4s and heavier weaponry. Ambushes may strike isolated vehicles, and Javelin missiles could threaten tanks and armored units. Yet even under these conditions, confrontations overwhelmingly favor American forces. Superior workforce, advanced weapons, and coordinated tactics force cartel operatives to retreat whenever possible, prioritizing survival over futile resistance. One of the greatest challenges the U.S. faces is the cartel's escape infrastructure. Decades of conflict have honed their ability to vanish from sight. Underground tunnels, a hallmark of cartel strategy, allow operatives and leaders to evade even heavily armed adversaries. In 2022, authorities uncovered a 1,700-foot tunnel connecting Tijuana to a warehouse in San Diego. 61 feet underground and 4 feet in diameter, the passage featured a rudimentary railway system. Though primarily used for narcotics smuggling, tunnels like this double as emergency escape routes. Such tunnels are not unique. Multiple passages between Tijuana and San Diego have been discovered, and countless smaller hidden tunnels likely exist deeper in Mexico. The infamous prison escape of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, aided by a mile-long tunnel, illustrates the scale and sophistication of these networks. Cartel strongholds almost certainly feature similar systems that provide leaders with discrete avenues to flee during U.S. operations. Despite these challenges, American forces have developed strategies to counter them. Leveraging intelligence from Mexican authorities and cooperative civilians, the U.S. systematically implements blockades, targeted raids, and surgical strikes. Some missions capture high-value cartel members, while even partial successes scatter remaining personnel, forcing the abandonment of weapons caches and leaving territory temporarily undefended. These operations reveal a crucial insight: defeating the cartels does not require conventional warfare. By isolating members, cutting off resources, and restricting movement, American forces can cripple operational capacity. Disrupting the cartel's ability to function can be as effective as direct engagement, and this is where the U.S. Navy becomes a decisive factor. The Mexican cartels operate a makeshift navy, not one of battleships and fleets, but a network of vessels designed to move narcotics by sea. As Rear Admiral Christopher Tomey of the U.S. Coast Guard's Joint Insurgency Task Force South revealed in 2015, over 95% of drugs bound for the United States travel via water. Cartels utilize every type of vessel available, from massive container ships and non-commercial craft to sailboats, yachts, and humble fishing boats. Speedboats allow smugglers to outrun patrols, while improvised submersibles, constructed from fiberglass and marine-grade plywood, add a stealthy dimension. These crude submarines, powered by commercial engines and costing roughly $1 million each, slip beneath patrols undetected. Yet despite their ingenuity, the cartel fleet is strictly transactional, designed for concealment and transport, not combat. At sea, the United States enjoys overwhelming superiority. Its 440 naval assets collectively reach 4.5 million tons, a measure of size and endurance. Among them are 11 aircraft carriers and 9 helicopter carriers, unmatched platforms for projecting power. The cartels have no weapons capable of threatening these vessels, allowing the U.S. Navy to stage air and sea operations off Mexico with impunity. Complementing the carriers are 81 destroyers, long-range warships equipped with integrated anti-air, anti-submarine, and anti-surface systems, including long-range missiles. 26 corvettes provide agile surface support, while nearly 70 submarines offer decisive undersea capability, capable of neutralizing cartel submersibles or surface craft with a single torpedo. Identification remains the operational challenge. Civilian cargo ships or yachts cannot be targeted on suspicion alone. As a result, blockades and maritime interception become central strategies. The U.S. has concentrated its naval presence in choke points, including a cordon in the Gulf of Mexico, deployments in the Atlantic and Pacific, and a blockade near the Yucatan Channel positioned outside Cuban waters. On land, these efforts work in tandem with ground operations targeting cartel strongholds. In the air, the cartel's capabilities remain primarily logistical. Between 2006 and 2015, Mexican authorities seized nearly 600 planes and helicopters linked to the Sinaloa cartel, and thousands of clandestine airstrips reportedly facilitated their movement. Standard aircraft, Cessnas, Pipers, and Gulfstreams serve transport purposes but offer no offensive power. By contrast, The United States fields roughly 13,000 aircraft, including nearly 1,800 fighters, approximately 900 attack aircraft, 900 fixed-wing transports, a tanker fleet of 600, and thousands of helicopters. This overwhelming force dominates the skies, yet the U.S. has acted with restraint, avoiding direct strikes in populated areas. Instead, it turns off cartel mobility by targeting isolated airstrips and facilities, achieving strategic impact without widespread civilian risk. Recent surveillance operations have intensified efforts to locate hidden landing strips and trafficking routes. Once a strip is confirmed, it is rendered unusable, cutting off the air corridors that cartels rely on. Combined with tighter controls at civilian airports and inspections of private aircraft, this strategy effectively grounds much of the cartel fleet, leaving smugglers with only a handful of helicopters, few of which can match the scale or sophistication of U.S. aerial power. The conflict between the U.S. military and the Mexican cartels increasingly appears to favor American forces. Even while restraining full capabilities to protect civilians, the U.S. has struck cartel strongholds, imposed a naval blockade, and asserted near-total control of Mexican airspace. Yet the cartels remain far from powerless. Their greatest weapon is money. Estimates of their wealth vary widely. In 1929, Senator David Perdue described the cartel business as a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, potentially reaching $500 billion, larger than Walmart itself. Other analyses suggested annual revenues between $6 and $29 billion. Still, either way, the sums are staggering, providing ample resources to fund weapons, bribes, and logistics for a pseudo-military operation. Homeland Security Chairman Mark E. Green added perspective in 2023, noting that cartels earned an estimated $13 billion in 2021 alone from human trafficking and smuggling. While still far below the U.S.'s $850 billion defense budget in 2024, these funds allow cartels to purchase black market weapons, bribe local officials, and exploit weak links in law enforcement or the military, fortifying their operations in ways that pure firepower alone cannot counter. This financial leverage also reinforces the rationale for a U.S. naval blockade. With 95% of cartel drugs shipped by water, blocking ports denies their primary revenue stream. Remaining cash becomes finite, limiting the ability to replenish stockpiles or expand operations. Simultaneously, U.S. intelligence and ground forces target drug production facilities, using spy planes and guidance from Mexican authorities to dismantle the infrastructure that fuels the cartel economy. Outside supply chains are also under scrutiny. Roughly 90% of cocaine entering the U.S. originates in Colombia before passing through Mexican territory. Disrupting these routes through naval coverage in the South Pacific or checkpoints along Central America's borders further starves the cartels of revenue. The objective is clear: weaken the financial lifeline, create internal friction, and force cartel members to reveal key leaders. Yet even with these strategies, the cartels remain formidable because they operate in ways that differ from those of conventional armies. Violence within cartel networks is methodical and increasingly militarized. Robert J. Bunker, editor of Illicit Tactical Progress, Mexican Cartel Tactical Notes, 2013 to 2020, notes that cartels have incorporated military-grade weapons such as standoff munitions, rocket-propelled grenades, and rifle grenades. Foot soldiers wear body armor, carry assault rifles, and train in specialized camps designed to teach tactics and desensitize recruits to extreme violence. Improvised explosive devices and booby traps are common. This preparation primes cartels for guerrilla warfare. While the U.S. military may dismantle strongholds, destroy airstrips, and sever cash flows, much of the conflict takes the form of hit-and-run attacks, ambushes, and blending into local populations. Cartels exploit fear and chaos to control civilians, limit intelligence, and hinder American operations. Divide-and-conquer tactics allow small, dispersed U.S. units to be targeted, further complicating operational effectiveness. Corruption compounds the challenge. In December 2023, Mexican authorities arrested over 100 police officers across 2 states for misconduct and collusion. Cartels exploit this local corruption, using bribes to distort intelligence and protect networks. Combined with guerrilla tactics and vast financial resources, These defenses make the cartels resilient, adaptive, and challenging to dismantle entirely. America's strategy of cutting off the cartel's income strikes directly at the heart of their guerrilla tactics. Still, another critical factor could unravel the network entirely: the fragmented nature of the cartels themselves. There is no single, unified Mexican cartel. Instead, the country hosts multiple powerful gangs, the largest being the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco New Generation cartel. Other significant players include Losas, the Beltran organization, the Gulf cartel, and the Juarez cartel. These groups are constantly at war with one another, battling over territory and influence. This infighting becomes decisive in the later stages of the conflict. Guerrilla attacks from small cartel units may harass U.S. forces, but leadership is fractured. No single authority exists to coordinate resistance. Efforts to unify will likely produce chaos at the top. As the U.S. dismantles airstrips, destroys strongholds, and blocks financial lifelines, it can largely wait for the cartel's internal disorganization to work against them. Multiple warring factions attempting to cooperate often result in self-inflicted disruption that can be more damaging than American firepower. Even if the cartels manage some semblance of order, it will not suffice. The full force of the U.S. military would crush rank-and-file fighters, erase strongholds, and sever the flow of drugs and money. Guerrilla tactics would falter under overwhelming pressure, leaving cartel leaders exposed and hunted individually. In the end, the combination of internal disarray and relentless U.S. operations would bring the cartel's empire in Mexico to inevitable collapse. Have you ever wondered what happens when militants take on the wrong target? Picture two MH-60R Seahawks slicing through dawn over the southern Red Sea, while the Maersk Hangzhou steams below, blissfully unaware of Houthi fast attack boats closing in with RPGs and PKMs. The ship's few security contractors scan the horizon, fingers tight on triggers. Every second counts. Ready today to see what unfolds when cutting-edge helicopters meet heavily armed militants? Let's dive into a truly real showdown where split-second decisions and raw firepower spell the difference between sinking and surviving. Nothing about that morning felt routine. At exactly 6:30 a.m. local time, two U.S. Navy MH-60R Seahawk helicopters, call signs Lancer 71 from USS Dwight D. Eisenhower and Lancer 72 from USS Gravely, were hovering just above the surface of the southern Red Sea. Their mission was simple in description, but critical in intent: provide top cover for a naval task force patrolling those waters. For months, Houthi attacks had been on the rise in the same area, making global trade nervous and shipping costs climb. Ships had been rerouting, waiting on slow convoys and watching every radar screen as they passed near Yemen. These MH-60R Seahawks aren't ordinary choppers. Since 2010, they've served as the U.S. Navy's primary helicopters for hunting submarines and watching surface ships. They replaced older SH-60B and SH-60F aircraft, and quickly proved their worth by flying more often and staying ready longer than any other maritime helicopter. They carry advanced radars, sonar systems, and a mix of weapons, enough to handle threats from under the waves to above deck. On this morning, though, the patrol had been quiet. The pilots scanned the horizon, looking for anything suspicious, but so far the seas and the sky had given no hints of trouble. Below them, about 55 nautical miles southwest of Al Hudaydah, Yemen, the Singapore-flagged container ship Maersk Hangzhou steamed toward its next port, carrying dozens of containers stacked high on its deck. It was a familiar sight in these trade routes, part of the flow that sends goods across the world. But that day, the Hangzhou had a layer of extra protection. Security contractors from Trident Group stood watch on deck, ready to deal with any unwanted visitors. With Houthi forces in the area launching fast attack boats, firing rockets, and disrupting shipping lanes, a team of trained guards was something no captain wanted to sail without. As the sun rose, its light turned the gentle ripples of the Red Sea golden. From their vantage point a few hundred feet up, the Seahawk crews could see another ship or two on the horizon and the occasional fishing boat, but nothing that screamed danger. Meanwhile, the Maersk Hangzhou's crew went through their routine checks. Engines, deck lines, and cargo latches, making sure everything was secure for the day ahead. The Trident contractors, wearing their distinctive gear, scanned the water for any fast boats that might slip in close. Their drill was well rehearsed. If small craft crept too near, they would sound alarms, lock down key areas, and hold their positions until they could see if the boats were friendly or hostile. Unknown to the Seahawk pilots, a formation of Houthi fast attack boats was moving quietly from the coast near Hodeida. The Houthi group uses fast boats called the Tufan series, often to shake up shipping and keep larger ships on edge. These machines can sneak close without risking a crew and add another layer of worry for anyone sailing through the region. Their plan was straightforward: surge forward, close in on the Maersk Hangzhou, and try to board before the crew could react. If successful, they would seize control of the ship's deck and cargo. But the attackers did not know that Lancer 71 and Lancer 72 were patrolling overhead, or that their sensors were on high alert for exactly this kind of move. Back on Maersk Hangzhou, the Trident security contractors had orders to stay extra vigilant. They watched the water surface with binoculars and listened to every radio call. When anything moved faster than a fishing skiff or cast a shadow too large for a local show, they were trained to report it immediately. Under that early morning light, the breakers of the Red Sea hid many things. Shadows could be dolphins, dark shapes might be drifting debris, but these contractors knew to trust their instincts. If the boat slipped past 6 nautical miles out, alarms would sound, and the crew would lock down key areas of the ship. By the time the Houthi boats closed in to 6 nautical miles, the Maersk Hangzhou's alarm bells rang out. The Trident guards moved to their defensive positions, some behind steel barriers near the deckhouse, others checking that fire hoses were ready if needed. They called into radios, trying to warn off any approaching craft and alert any friendly forces nearby. Above them, Lancer 71 and Lancer 72 were still circling, their crews scanning radar scopes for the same signs of trouble. Neither the Seahawk pilots nor the ship's crew knew how quickly events could unfold once hostiles drew near. But at that moment, both sets of eyes, those in the cockpits and those on the vessel's deck, were locked on the same target area, and everyone was poised, ready to respond the instant they saw the next move. Everything hinged on a few seconds and the weapons each side had. On Maersk Hangzhou, the security team had nothing more than M4 rifles and an M240 machine gun. Against that, the Houthi boats were packing rockets, RPGs with thermobaric warheads, and belt-fed PKM machine guns, all weapons that shoot farther, hit harder, and rip through thin metal hulls like paper. In the quiet before the storm, both sides knew an intense fight was coming, but neither could fully predict how fast it would all unfold. Within minutes, those small, fast boats would close the gap and press themselves right up against the merchant ship's hull. The Hangzhou's defenses, just a handful of rifles and a single heavy machine gun, were simply outclassed. Meanwhile, high above the waves, the 2 Seahawk helicopters listened for a distress call from below. The moment that call crackled through the radios, both choppers sprang to life. In fixed-wing terms, they needed to close a 26 nautical mile gap, which at full tilt, 160 knots, would still take about 9 minutes. But by then, the Houthis would already be climbing over the side. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. At exactly 6:31 a.m., the MH-60Rs, call signs Lancer 71 and Lancer 72, picked up suspicious contacts on their radar. 4 Iranian-supplied, Boghammer-style fast attack boats were converging on Maersk Hangzhou. Each one measured 7 to 10 meters long, sleek and low to the water, built for speed rather than comfort. Traveling at roughly 50 knots apiece, they raced in a tight, converging formation, like wolves closing in on a wounded deer. Their crews, 3 to 4 Houthi militants per boat, carried PKM machine guns, AK-47 rifles, and RPGs. 2 of those RPG teams had thermobaric Taba-14 warheads, the kind of weapon that can blast through 300 millimeters of rolled armor. For a container ship with a hull barely 25 millimeters thick, that meant a direct hit could punch a hole the size of a watermelon without breaking a sweat. Even more unsettling, each Houthi boat was rigged with a Starlink terminal. With that setup, they weren't operating blind. Real-time data streamed back and forth between the boats, overhead drones, coastal spotters, and command posts in Hodeida. If one fast boat pilot spotted something on the water, he'd share it instantly with the rest. That level of coordination, feeding live imagery and position reports into a shared network, meant these attacks weren't random or desperate raids. They were carefully planned strikes, following what Iranian naval experts call asymmetric doctrine. Put simply, the Houthis were using cheap, fast platforms and smart communications to overwhelm a bigger target. Trident Group security contractors on Maersk Hangzhou braced by the stern and port side as 4 Houthi fast attack boats approached. At several kilometers out, they fired M240B machine guns, hitting one of Boghammer's hulls and spraying water. Only one staggered. The others closed in, engines roaring, guns ready. The boats covered the final 1,200 meters in seconds, reaching 600 meters inside RPG range, spiking tension. Any RPG or thermobaric rocket could punch a hull hole or spark a deck explosion, risking a boarding. The Seahawks were 9 minutes away. The ship's defense relied on shouted commands, precise M240 fire, and the attackers' fragile boats. In that moment, 6:31 and 47 seconds into the morning, the distance was almost gone. The attackers' shift from 1,800 meters to 600 meters had taken less time than it takes to count one Mississippi. The next move would be the most dangerous, when the Houthi boats slipped under the boom of the Hangzhou's deck and tried to climb aboard. At that sliver of time, everyone involved knew the outcome would set the stage for what came next. Either a close-quarters fight on deck or the arrival of U.S. Navy Hawks just in time. But as the boats closed, the divide between success and failure was measured in mere feet, and those few seconds could decide it all. That morning, everything boiled down to a few critical moments. On Maersk Hangzhou's deck, the security team's suppressive fire managed to smash one of the attackers' rudder assemblies, sending one Boghammer skiff veering off course. But the larger threat was still barreling toward them. The RPG gunner on Boat 2 pulled the trigger and sent a thermobaric warhead screaming in their direction. It zipped past, coming within a hair's breadth, just 3 meters, of the ship's superstructure, the bridge area that sticks up above the main deck, where the captain and crew steer in coordinate defenses. If that shot had landed, the Hangzhou would have lost its ability to maneuver or call for help, leaving it a sitting duck. At that moment, the trenches of sand or the stacked crates on deck weren't going to hold back the Houthi militants for much longer. The security detail was on the brink of being overrun, and that's when the Seahawks finally appeared. The M60R helicopters, Lancer 71 and Lancer 72, answered the distress call as quickly as physics would allow. But they weren't teleporters. From their patrol orbit, they were still 26 nautical miles away. Even pushing their turbine engines to scream at 160 knots, it would take roughly 9 minutes to reach the Hangzhou. And those 9 minutes felt like an eternity when you're staring down attackers armed with rocket-propelled grenades. When the trapped security team on deck staved off the skiffs just long enough, the Boghammers were forced to pause at around 600 meters out. They wanted to plaster the ship with RPG fire before making their boarding attempt. That brief lull proved to be precisely the opening the Seahawks needed. By 6:39 a.m., just 8 minutes after the first shots, both helicopters had closed the distance to just a mile. With their rotors whipping the salty air, Lancers 71 and 72 were in position. But having helicopters overhead doesn't automatically mean a quick zap and a tidy finish. The pilots still had to figure out which boats to hit first. Hidden beneath the nose of each Seahawk helicopter is the AN/APS 153-V radar system, a remarkable piece of technology. Designed to scan the sea surface and detect tiny contacts, this radar sends out radio waves that bounce back from ships, submarines, and small boats. Its precision allows pilots and crew to spot objects in the water from miles away, day or night, in weather or through fog and rain. The information it gathers is displayed on screens inside the aircraft, guiding decision-makers to track moving targets or search for potential threats. Thanks to this radar, the Seahawks can carry out reconnaissance and safety missions with confidence. From nearly 42 kilometers away, it first picked up the 4 Iranian-supplied Boghammer-style boats. But the Red Sea's choppy waters throw up plenty of sea clutter, random reflections off waves that look like legitimate contacts. To sort real threats from the foam, the radar needed a better look. Initially, the radar was painting a chaotic picture, tracking 32 separate contacts, from fishing dhows to drifting debris. To cut through the noise, pilots switched to narrow pulse mode, sending half to 1 microsecond bursts for tracking precise location, speed, and size data. Like zooming in to avoid background blur, this helped Seahawks lock onto 4 attack boats. But narrow pulses alone couldn't deliver pinpoint targeting, so they activated the Moving Target Indicator, MTI, which uses the Doppler effect. When radar waves bounce off a moving vessel, the frequency shifts, like a motorcycle's engine pitch, rising and falling as it passes. Measuring these shifts lets radar distinguish a real boat from a wave. With MTI humming, pilots suddenly saw each Boghamar's true speed, heading, and size. No more guessing. The formidable fast attack crafts appeared in razor-sharp focus, engines churning the sea as they steamed toward Maersk Hangzhou's flanks, closing in rapidly and dangerously. At 1 mile out, the Seahawks held their positions overhead, circling like guardian angels. Their arrival shifted the balance. For now, the Houthi skiffs had to think twice before swarming the deck. But as those 4 boats roared beneath, their crews still gripped RPGs and PKMs. They could feel the weight of 2 rotary-wing jets ready to rain down fire if needed. In those tense seconds, with the radar feeding data into their consoles and the MTI isolating targets from the waves, the Seahawk pilots prepared to make the first move. Their mission: protect the unarmed container ship and its security team from being overwhelmed. And that is where this extract leaves off, with 2 Seahawk helicopters hovering above, sensors locked on hostile boats closing in, and the next decisive moments hanging in the balance. By the time the helicopters closed in, the pilots had already used the radar's Moving Target Indicator to pick out which blips on the screen were actual boats, not just waves. But once MTI confirmed something solid was moving, they switched to Inverse Synthetic Aperture Radar, or ISAR. Think of ISAR as a high-tech camera that figures out a precise picture of whatever it locks onto, using those same Doppler shifts that tip them off to movement. In practice, this meant the pilots could see real-time detailed images of the fast attack boats, their size, shape, and even some markings on the hull. No more guessing which targets were the attackers. Now they had visual confirmation that the Houthi boats were dead ahead. And with that, it was go time. Each Seahawk was ready for exactly this kind of fight. Under each side door sat a GAU 21.50 caliber machine gun, often called 50s in military lingo, called crew served because they needed both a pilot to fly and a door gunner to pull the trigger. These guns could spit out up to 1,100 rounds every single minute, with bullets reaching out nearly 2,000 meters. The ammo load was a mix of armor-piercing incendiary rounds, which could punch through metal and start fires, and tracer rounds, which left a little streak of light so the door gunners could see exactly where their shots were going. All told, the Seahawks had enough firepower to shred the thin-skinned Boghamar boats from well above the waterline. But the Houthis had one more card to play, and they played it at 6:40 a.m. As the helicopters drifted into position, 4 PKM machine guns on the lead Houthi boat opened up. The tracers snapped in the serious early morning light, with rounds zipping past within just 15 meters of the Seahawks' rotors. That's close. So close that the chaos of bullets could have easily shredded rotors or punched into a fuel tank. In the Houthis' minds, getting in the first shots might have knocked a Seahawk out of the sky. Instead, it turned out to be their last mistake. Without hesitation, both helicopters dropped lower down to about 150 feet off the water, tightening the distance so their own guns could get the most accurate angle. At the same time, knowing how quickly things can go south, each Seahawk sprayed countermeasures behind them. They released a dozen bright-burning MJU-68B flares, each one blasting up to 2,200 degrees Celsius and burning for nearly 2.5 seconds. Alongside the flares, they dropped 24 bundles of RR-180 chaff, which scattered into a kind of silver cloud to confuse any radar-guided missile. No one saw a missile trace, so it turned out these extra precautions weren't needed. But in a situation like this, you don't wait to find out if the bad guys have a shoulder-fired heat seeker. You assume they might. And then all hell broke loose in earnest. Exactly 1 minute after the Houthis' first salvo, at 6:41, Lancer 71's door gunner picked out Boat 1 as the highest threat, a small craft roaring forward with a fresh set of PKMs and an RPG launcher aimed at the ship below. The Seahawk pilot held steady, giving the gunner a stable platform. 3 bursts of .50 caliber bullets came screaming out, each round a potential game-changer. The first 2 streams of fire rattled across the bow, but the third was a direct hit, slamming right into the engine block. For those who know anything about boat engines, that's the critical hit. Destroy the motor, and the craft can't maneuver or flee. But here's what really made sparks fly. The slug that struck didn't just stop the engine, it ruptured the fuel cell. In an instant, a fireball erupted so bright the pilots could see it from their cockpit, and debris from the burning hull shot into the air. Within 45 seconds of that first burst, Boat 1 was no more than a smoldering wreck. As the flames spread, it took on water and sank beneath the waves, leaving nothing but smoke in a trembling wake. For the crew on Maersk Hangzhou below, the sound of that explosion and the sight of boat debris trailing off was the clearest promise that help had arrived. The other 3 Bogomars, momentarily stunned by Boat 1's destruction, wavered in their advance. For a brief, crucial moment, the Hangzhou's security team could breathe a little easier, and the Seahawks had proven their might. At that exact point, the fight was far from over, but Boat 1's sinking marked a turning point. It was the first domino to fall in what would become a decisive defense of a merchant ship under siege. Before the first boghammer even finished sliding beneath the waves, Lancer 71 banked hard to the left and locked onto Boat 2. Imagine a helicopter suddenly tipping, its nose pointing toward a small craft speeding across choppy water. That's exactly what the pilot did. The door gunner let loose a quick burst of .50 caliber rounds that blew out the rudder. Without steering, the little skiff started veering wildly, like a go-kart with a busted wheel. The gunner didn't let up. He poured in a solid 3-second spray of armor-piercing incendiary rounds into the already crippled boat. Within moments, Boat 2 listed violently, water gushed in through the shattered hull, and by 6:42 a.m., it rolled over and capsized, disappearing into the depths. With 2 helicopters circling overhead, the pilots didn't waste a second. They shifted their sights to Boat 3. This time, both Lancer 71 and Lancer 72 trained their guns together on a single target. The twin streams of tracers looked almost poetic, like synchronized swimmers cutting through the water, but made of bullets. In just a few heartbeats, dozens of armor-piercing shells hammered into Boat 3's underside, punching holes below its waterline. The crew on that skiff realized they were done for. Water flooded in faster than their frantic attempts to bail it out. By 6:44 a.m., Boat 3 gave a final lurch and sank, leaving only a swirl of oily foam where it had been. Boat 4, seeing 3 of its comrades sent to Davy Jones's locker, decided discretion was the better part of valor. Instead of charging in, it spun around and booked it back out to sea. Smoke trailed from its damaged engine as it limped northwest, trying to put distance between itself and the Seahawk helicopters. Lancer 71 and Lancer 72 could have chased it, but their orders were clear. Stay with the merchant ship. With Boat 4 racing away, the helicopters hovered above the Maersk Hangzhou, their guns still hot but their focus returning to protecting the vessel. In just under 7 minutes, from the first crash of bullets to the last sinking hull, the 2 Seahawks had sent 3 Boghamar boats to the bottom. Between them, they'd fired roughly 1,800 rounds of ammunition, each designed to rip through metal while keeping as much distance from their own rotors as possible. But for the U.S. military brass, this was only the start of their message. Sinking a few boats in self-defense was one thing. They wanted to make it painfully clear that attacking U.S. escorts would carry far greater costs. Within 8 hours of that morning's skirmish, the guided missile destroyer USS Gravely steamed close to the Yemeni coast. Its target, a handful of coastal radar stations the Houthis had been using to give data to their fast attack boats. Those sites at Jabal al-Tayr, Al-Mocha, and Ras Isa had been eyes in the sky, telling Houthi skippers where U.S. ships were, what courses they took, and when they might slip into danger. Starting later that afternoon, Gravely's 5-inch Mark 45 Mod 4 naval gun swung into action. Each round weighed about 70 pounds, packed with high explosives or airburst charges. flying at roughly 2,600 feet per second up to 9 miles out. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Gravely moved up and down the coast with relative ease. At each radar installation, it unleashed a barrage, blast after blast, until 3 entire sites lay in ruins. Post-strike drone assessments showed that those hits degraded Houthi maritime surveillance by at least 60%. That meant those fast boats would now have to rely on less accurate spotting methods, like someone on shore peering through binoculars rather than satellite-linked radars. With those coastal eyes taken out, the Houthis lost the tactical edge that had made their swarm tactics so deadly. But U.S. retaliation didn't stop at taking out radars. New Year's Day brought another round of strikes. On January 1st, just after sunset, 4 FA-18E Super Hornets from Strike Fighter Squadron 131 took off from USS Dwight D. Eisenhower. Each jet carried 2 AGM-154C Joint Standoff Weapons, JSOWs, smart glide bombs designed to blast through reinforced concrete. Each JSOWC had a 500-pound broach warhead, which on impact unleashed a molten metal jet capable of carving through 3.7 meters of solid concrete like warm butter. At 6:43 p.m. local time, those 4 missiles struck the Al-Durahimi missile warehouse. One by one, explosions rocked the compound as secondary blasts erupted from the stacks of rockets and missiles inside. Intercepts of Houthi radio chatter afterward confirmed what everyone expected. 18 Qasef drones were destroyed on the ground before ever lifting off, along with 4 Noor anti-ship missiles and multiple missile guidance kits. Critically, 2 Iranian advisors who were there to assist and 12 Houthi operators lost their lives in the blast. That final strike sent a loud and clear message. The U.S. response to Houthi aggression wouldn't end once the helicopters went home and the Bot 4 skiff had slipped away. From shutting down radar sites to wiping out drone production and missile stocks, the Americans were determined to remove the Houthis' ability to launch future attacks. If you attacked a U.S.-escorted ship, you wouldn't just face immediate defense, you'd feel the consequences days later when bombs and rounds rained on your assets long after the smoke cleared. The war on drugs has entered a new phase. For the first time, Washington has authorized the Pentagon to use lethal force against Mexico's cartels. In a single strike, a USM-109 self-propelled howitzer destroyed 15 cartel vehicles, an unmistakable sign that surveillance is over and firepower has begun. This is not a drill. The question now, how far will America go? And how long can the cartels withstand the assault? Join us as we uncover the strategy behind America's first direct strikes on the cartels. The United States military has deployed 4,000 Marines and sailors to the waters surrounding the Caribbean islands of Latin America, signaling the start of direct operations against organized drug cartels. At the center of this deployment is the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, embarked aboard the Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group, or ARG, one of the Navy's most advanced expeditionary forces, purpose-built to project power from the sea to any point on the globe. The ARG is composed of 3 principal amphibious vessels, the USS Iwo Jima, the USS San Antonio, and the USS New York. Each ship is engineered for combat resilience, operational flexibility, and sustained offensive capability. The USS Iwo Jima, a landing helicopter dock, functions as a floating command base for Marines and aircraft alike. It is capable of launching helicopters, MV-22 Osprey tiltrotors, and amphibious assault vehicles. Defensive systems such as the Rolling Airframe Missile System and the Phalanx Close-In Weapon System protect the ship from incoming missiles, aircraft, and surface threats, ensuring operational readiness even in contested waters. The USS San Antonio and USS New York, both amphibious transport docks, are stealth-enhanced platforms designed to transport thousands of Marines, vehicles, and essential equipment directly to shore. They support over-the-horizon amphibious operations through a combination of landing craft, helicopters, and tiltrotor aircraft. Modern command and control systems allow real-time coordination with airborne units, naval forces, and Marines on the ground. Reinforced hulls and structures provide significant blast resistance, enhancing survivability in hostile environments. Together, these vessels form a mobile, heavily defended base capable of sustained operations far from home ports. The 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit itself brings unmatched versatility and combat capability. Consisting of approximately 2,200 Marines, the unit is trained in amphibious warfare, urban combat, reconnaissance, and special operations. It is equipped with armored vehicles, amphibious assault vehicles, artillery, and air support assets, including AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters, AV-8B Harrier jump jets, and MV-22 Ospreys. This combination of firepower and mobility enables rapid, decisive strikes against both land and coastal targets. The ARG's effectiveness also stems from its integrated network of advanced technologies. Ships, aircraft, and marine units are connected through secure, real-time command and control systems, allowing rapid intelligence sharing, precision targeting, and coordinated operations. This connectivity enables the ARG to conduct amphibious assaults, humanitarian missions, maritime security, or specialized operations with speed and accuracy. Its mobility ensures a global response capability within days, projecting both deterrent and offensive power. Additional naval assets, including a nuclear-powered attack submarine, multiple destroyers, and a guided missile cruiser, further support the expedition. Among the military vehicles reportedly being deployed is the M109 self-propelled howitzer, produced by BAE Systems and a mainstay of U.S. Army artillery units. This tracked vehicle, weighing 27.5 tons, measures 30 feet in length, 10 feet 4 inches in width, and 10 feet 8 inches in height. It accommodates a crew of 6, a commander, gunner, driver, and 3 ammunition specialists. The vehicle is powered by a Detroit diesel 8-box 71T engine paired with an Allison XTG 411-4A cross-drive transmission, enabling a top speed of 35 miles per hour and an operational range of 216 miles. Constructed with all-welded aluminum armor, the M109 offers protection against small arms fire and shell fragments. The driver sits at the front left of the hull, with the power pack located to the right and the turret at the rear. Visibility is provided through 3 M45-day periscopes, one of which can be replaced with a passive night vision periscope. The rear-mounted turret features a fully traversable design, with a commander's cupola on the right side offering 360-degree rotation and a pine tool-mounted .50 caliber machine gun. The gunner operates from the left side of the turret, while twin rear doors facilitate ammunition resupply. A manually lowered spade at the rear of the hull stabilizes the vehicle when firing top charges, ensuring precision during artillery operations. The M109 also employs a torsion bar suspension system on each side, supported by 7 dual rubber-tired road wheels. The drive sprocket is positioned at the front, with the idler at the rear, and there are no track return rollers. Its tracks are of a single-pin, center guide design, featuring replaceable rubber pads to enhance mobility over varied terrain. Equipped with night vision capabilities, the M109 does not protect against nuclear, biological, or chemical threats. However, the vehicle can be adapted for amphibious operations with a kit of 9 airbags, 4 along each hull side and 1 at the front. Once inflated, these allow the vehicle to propel itself across rivers at speeds up to 4 miles per hour using its tracks. The primary armament consists of a 155mm M126 howitzer mounted in an M127 assembly, complete with a fume extractor and a large muzzle brake. Its effective firing range extends to 10 miles, with a maximum rate of fire of 6 rounds per minute and a sustained rate of 3 rounds per minute. The recoil system is hydro-pneumatic, while the Welland-step thread breech block ensures secure operation. Hydraulic systems control gun elevation, depression, and turret traverse, with manual overrides available for emergencies. Fire control equipment includes the M118C elbow telescope for direct fire, providing 4 times magnification and a 10-degree field of view, the M117 panoramic telescope for indirect fire, and the M1A1 gunner's quadrant. Beyond the hardware, U.S. military officials are preparing to expand operational options in Latin America. Historically, the Navy had to coordinate with the Coast Guard to carry out lethal actions or arrests. Current planning includes multiple kinetic options against drug cartels, ranging from potential missile strikes launched from destroyers to closer collaboration with Mexican authorities, to target criminal networks directly. Officials envision the construction of barracks and secure operational bases in Mexico, allowing American Special Operations Forces to conduct precision capture missions against high-value targets. In May, U.S. and Mexican forces conducted a rare raid on 3 major drug laboratories in Sinaloa, seizing fentanyl and chemical precursors, operations performed directly on cartel territory. Despite these measures, U.S. officials acknowledge clear limits under current rules of engagement. As a Washington Post report notes, military strikes remain audacious and potentially unlikely to receive presidential approval, signaling both the ambition and the caution guiding U.S. operations in the region. In recent months, the United States quietly deployed 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers to the Gulf of Mexico, a move without precedent in the region's modern naval history. These warships had only recently concluded missions in the Red Sea, where they played a role in countering Houthi attacks. The Arleigh Burke destroyer is one of the most advanced and heavily armed platforms the U.S. Navy has ever produced, combining layered defenses, long-range strike capability, and sophisticated electronic warfare systems. Each ship carries the ANSLQ-32 electronic warfare suite, designed to detect, track, and disrupt enemy radar. Variants such as the SLQ-32V3, V6, and V7 add radar jamming capabilities, giving the destroyer the ability to blind hostile sensors before an attack can be launched. Their firepower is centered on the Mark 41 vertical launching system, with 90 cells on the early versions and 96 cells on later ships. These cells carry a wide range of missiles, making the destroyer more heavily armed than many cruisers that preceded it. The standard missile family provides the primary air defense shield. The SM-2 offers both medium and long-range protection. At the same time, the SM-6 extends engagement ranges beyond the horizon and is capable of targeting both aircraft and warships. Advanced seeker technology allows these missiles to engage multiple targets at once, with minimal reliance on shipboard radar illumination. For land attack, the Arleigh Burkes rely on the Tomahawk cruise missile. The latest Block VD variant has introduced new capabilities. The Block VA, or Maritime Strike Tomahawk, extends the destroyer's ability to engage enemy warships, while the Block VB carries a new multi-effects warhead optimized for hardened or diverse land targets. With up to 96 Tomahawks loaded, a single destroyer can strike infrastructure, bases, or cartel-linked facilities far inland. The deployment of these destroyers positions them within reach of cartel-controlled laboratories and smuggling infrastructure, giving the United States the option to carry out precision strikes at sea or on land if required. Public statements, however, present the mission in different terms. Both Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador and U.S. Ambassador Ronald Johnson have stressed that the operations are framed as cooperative rather than unilateral. Ambassador Johnson wrote on X, "This is not about the United States acting alone. It's about building a joint, unshakable front with Mexico to defend our citizens, dismantle the cartel's networks, and ensure that the only people who need to fear for their future are those who profit from murder, addiction, and chaos." Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum responded with equal caution, asserting, "The United States is not sending its military to Mexico. We cooperate, we collaborate, but there will be no invasion. We are ruling this out absolutely." Earlier, in April 2025, the White House sought permission for U.S. troops to cross the Mexican border to assist in combat operations, including the use of lethal force against cartel targets. President Sheinbaum declined the proposal, maintaining sovereignty and operational control. While discussions of drug cartels typically focus on the United States and Mexico, the latest orders reveal a broader operational focus, targeting a country rarely mentioned in cartel narratives: Venezuela. On July 25, 2025, the U.S. government officially designated the Venezuelan cocaine cartel, Deo Sols, as a foreign terrorist organization. This cartel is alleged to operate as an extension of the Venezuelan government, comprised of military officers and political elites. Its origins trace back to the 1990s, when traffickers in Colombia began bribing Venezuelan border guards, evolving into what U.S. authorities now describe as a narco-terrorist enterprise with state-level involvement. Unlike Mexico, The official position of the United States is that Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro directly controls the De Sols cartel, and that his government functions as a narco-terrorist state, and this has been the U.S. stance for several years. The cartel is alleged to enjoy protection through its ties to senior Venezuelan officials. Its name, De Sols, is said to reference the Venezuelan military, translating roughly to Cartel of the Suns, with sun drawn from the insignia found on military general epaulets. In essence, the cartel operates as a covert arm of the Venezuelan state, functioning not as a traditional private military contractor, but as a private criminal enterprise embedded within government structures. Unlike Mexico, which is viewed as a partner and diplomatic ally, Venezuela is regarded as a hostile state. McDermott, co-founder of Inside Crime, explains, "The difference in Venezuela compared to Mexico and Colombia is that a significant portion of the business is managed within the state. Supporting evidence includes testimonies from defectors, alongside documented instances of Venezuelan military flights caught transporting narcotics to destinations, including Spain and the United States. These factors altered the U.S. risk calculus. Operations against Venezuela are considered legitimate actions against a hostile nation, unlike interventions in Mexico, where careful diplomacy must be maintained. The deployment of U.S. forces near Venezuelan waters is strategically significant, as these routes are major channels for illicit substances traveling from Venezuela through Mexico and the Caribbean islands before reaching the United States. The official U.S. designation of De Sols as a foreign terrorist organization underscores these concerns. According to the announcement, the cartel has provided material support to both the Aragua Tren and the Sinaloa cartel while operating directly from Venezuela. The U.S. asserts that Maduro has corrupted multiple branches of the Venezuelan government, including segments of the army, intelligence services, legislature, and judiciary, to facilitate the cartel's trafficking operations to the United States. In response, the White House announced a $50 million reward for information leading to the arrest or conviction of Nicolas Maduro for violations of U.S. narcotics law. The tensions between the United States and Venezuela are rooted in political as well as economic factors. Since 2020, Maduro is accused of consolidating power, effectively ending democratic governance during the 2024 election cycle. Venezuela also holds the world's largest proven oil reserves, surpassing even Saudi Arabia, and maintains strict state control over these resources, which the U.S. claims Maduro leverages as a political and strategic tool. From a national security perspective, Venezuela hosts Russian military advisors and maintains extensive arms programs with Russia, including granting port access to Russian warships. Russian bombers have been stationed in the country, and S-400 anti-aircraft systems operate on Venezuelan soil, marking a rare deployment of such advanced weapons in the Western Hemisphere. In addition, China has heavily invested in Venezuela's infrastructure, while Iran supplies oil tankers, military technology, and Quds Force operatives, its equivalent of a covert intelligence service. For Washington, Venezuela represents a strategic foothold where key geopolitical adversaries are permitted to operate. Consequently, what may appear as a counter-cartel mission in the Western Hemisphere carries the potential to escalate into a confrontation with other major powers. From Maduro's perspective, the U.S. presence is viewed as hostile interference, infringing upon national sovereignty. Venezuelan authorities cite a long history of American interventions in Latin America and frame the current operations as a continuation of that pattern, attributing the situation to the failures of the war on drugs. Public opinion within Venezuela remains divided, with factions both supporting and opposing Maduro. Insiders close to the White House, however, describe the mission's objective as the complete dismantling of Venezuelan cartel operations across the Western Hemisphere, signaling the extensive scope of the operation. A significant challenge for the U.S. military is its relative lack of institutional relationships in the region, compared with agencies like the FBI and DEA, which have maintained operational networks with Mexican authorities since the 1980s. To address this gap, the Pentagon recently established the Joint Service Interagency Advisory Group. This initiative integrates U.S. Special Forces operators with experts from federal agencies, such as the FBI and DEA, leveraging on-the-ground contacts and intelligence networks developed over decades. Direct action missions in Latin America have historical precedent, often serving as cautionary examples. In 2012, the DEA conducted Operation Anvil in Honduras, deploying tactical teams, effectively SUAT-like units, alongside Honduran police for a 90-day mission targeting drug traffickers. The operation, however, included 3 controversial incidents of deadly force that resulted in civilian casualties, provoking international criticism. Subsequent review by the U.S. Department of State concluded that insufficient operational planning and unclear rules of engagement were major factors in the failure. Following the operation, the DEA tactical teams were ordered to withdraw and were ultimately disbanded. The current campaign extends far beyond operations abroad. On the U.S. side of the border, the Department of Defense has designated nearly 1/3 of the southern border as national defense areas. These zones empower U.S. troops to detain individuals crossing illegally, circumventing traditional restrictions on military involvement in law enforcement. Roughly 1/3 of the U.S.-Mexico border is now under militarized control. Over 7,000 troops patrol hundreds of miles across Texas, New Mexico, and soon Arizona, supported by more than 50 Stryker armored vehicles operating in the desert borderlands. To date, over 1,400 migrants have been charged with trespassing on military-controlled land. These measures have disrupted the flow of drugs and migrants into the United States. The crackdown has cut cartel funding streams, and high-profile arrests of top cartel leaders in Mexico have sparked a violent internal conflict, forcing some cartels to merge in an effort to survive. Parallel to this militarization is Operation at Large, the largest coordinated interior enforcement effort since the 1940s. It involves more than 5,000 federal law enforcement personnel, including 3,000 ICE agents, 1,800 members of Homeland Security, and additional personnel from the Justice Department, U.S. Marshals, and Border Protection. The operation reportedly includes requests for up to 20,000 National Guard troops to support ICE activities, marking the most extensive federal deployment in the interior of the country in modern history. Admiral Halsey, who assumed command of U.S. forces in Central and South America in November 2024, recently outlined his strategy to Congress. The United States of America and the many nations and territories that comprise Latin America and the Caribbean are bound together by rich cultural tradition, family bonds, economic endeavor, and enduring commitment to democratic principles, he stated. He emphasized that the greatest threat is not solely the cartels, but also the strategic actions of Russia and China in the region. These authoritarian regimes continue their methodical incursion into the region, using varying tools towards separate end states. We can stem this tide by standing together, shoulder to shoulder with our allies and partners. Our partners want to work with the United States, but to maintain their trust and confidence, they must feel and see our presence and commitment before it's too late. Media reports indicate that the president has issued a classified directive, potentially a presidential finding for covert action or a presidential memorandum, enabling sensitive military operations. From this directive, officers develop CON plans that evolve into fully executable operational plans. Taken together, these developments reveal the emergence of a multi-front campaign: militarized buffer zones along U.S. soil, mass interior enforcement raids supported by unprecedented numbers of federal agents, military presence in urban centers such as Los Angeles, expanded intelligence collection abroad, and now directives for overt kinetic operations. The United States is conducting a campaign across the Western Hemisphere unlike anything seen in recent memory, integrating both domestic and international efforts with the military and intelligence community at the forefront. Thanks for watching. Before you go, click the link on your screen to check out another video. See you there.